Frosty the Snowman Under the Southern Cross, written by Joe Rothwell, illustrated by Bryce Rothwell. In the land where koalas laze in the trees, and wattle sways golden in the afternoon breeze, where platypus plunge and kangaroos leap, and emus are baffled by the size of their feet. It is here that the wombats wander and roam, and where Frosty the Snowman likes to call home. Mum and Dad, Uncle Jack and the baby twins were waiting in anticipation as Frosty toddled in. Excitement, delightment, and indeed jubilation as Frosty announced his wedding celebration. His snow girl Pippa, his blushing pink bride, agreed to be married and stand by his side. Under the Southern Cross they would marry one night and would party and dance under star and moonlight. Frosty taught her all about the shining Southern Cross. 5 stars guiding south if ever you should be lost. Pippa looked confused and asked Frosty, "Are you sure? You said there should be 5 stars, but I only counted 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tragedy, catastrophe, and certainly disaster. They need to find that missing star to live happily ever after. So Frosty called on Mr. C to help him search the nation. The quest to hunt that missing star meant urgent exploration. In a splish and a splash and a dash of belief, they journeyed up north to the Great Barrier Reef. Sea creatures swam with purpose and poise, in coral-coloured crimson, blue, pink and turquoise. Frosty excitedly shrieked with glee at the starfish he spotted right there in the sea, but it didn't quite sparkle and it didn't quite shine. Perhaps with a polish it would be perfectly fine. But it wasn't. With a click and a clack down a dusty old track, they ventured to search in Australia's outback. Cattle were whirling in a flurry and fluster as stockmen rode boldly in the brunette Downs muster. A star-studded stallion pranced by so proudly. "Another star found!" yelled Frosty quite loudly. But it didn't quite sparkle and it didn't quite shine. Perhaps with a brush it would be perfectly fine. But it wasn't. In a swirl and a twirl they continued their quest to the carpet of wildflowers that grew in the west. Everlasting daisies and flannel flowers thrived, proving the desert was truly alive. Starflowers flourished in this floral parade. Indeed, thought Frosty, it's here the stars strayed. But it didn't quite sparkle and it didn't quite shine. Perhaps with the water it would be perfectly fine. But it wasn't. In a flash and a dash they began to explore the untamed plains of the wild Nullarbor. They discovered lime caves majestically appealing, where stubborn stalactites cling tightly to the ceiling. The caves were magnificent, grand and colossal, and where star shapes were spotted right there in a fossil. But it didn't quite sparkle and it didn't quite shine. Perhaps with a dust it would be perfectly fine. But it wasn't. In a tick and a tack they sailed Bass Strait with Frosty as captain and Mr. C as first mate. "Land ahoy!" cried Frosty in his best captain style as they bumped into Hobart on the wondrous Apple Isle. At a market surrounded by food so nutritious, Frosty spied a star in his halved red delicious. But it didn't quite sparkle and it didn't quite shine. Perhaps with a rub it would be perfectly fine. But it wasn't. With a draft on a raft blowing over the sea, they journeyed to Melbourne and the MCG. A test cricket match was encircled by a crowd who waved as they whooped and clapped really loud. "How's that?" screamed the bowler as bails scattered about. The sports star rejoiced as the ump called, "You're out!" But he didn't quite sparkle and he didn't quite shine. Perhaps with a cheer he would be perfectly fine. But he wasn't. In a peep and a leap on the back of a sheep, they rode into Canberra longing for sleep. This capital city where politics is news was where Frosty the Snowman sat down for a snooze. Decorating the Parliament was a proud Aussie flag. Embroidered with stars, it swayed and it swagged, but it didn't quite sparkle and it didn't quite shine. Perhaps with a salute it would be perfectly fine. but it wasn't. In a blink and a wink at the speed of light, they settled in Sydney as dusk turned to night. Children were gathered by a tree lit so bright from the magical presence of Captain Starlight. This Christmas tree laden with wishes and dreams, bursting with kindness it glistens and gleams. Frosty looked carefully at the star on the tree that was winking and blinking, "Help set me free!" And it really did sparkle and it really did shine. Perhaps with some magic it would be perfectly fine. And it was! Pippa and Frosty were able to wed. Confetti was thrown and speeches were said. Dances were danced and photos were snapped. Cake was sliced and presents unwrapped. Music was played as the bouquet was tossed, with light from the star that was no longer lost. Happily home and perfectly fine, the Southern Cross cheered with sparkle and shine.